E ci riesco a mettere giù i piedi? Sì?
La levetta per abbassare. La costruzione di traversa.
Sì.
Ok, adesso la metto dentro.
Va bene, va bene.
La civiltà dell'amore, fratelli e sorelle, costruite senza stancarvi mai questa
Va bene,
civiltà.
perfetto.
Lavorate per questo, pregate per questo, soffrite per questo.
No, va bene così. Sì. Faccio pure. Buonasera a tutti.
Good evening and welcome to this session about the time for attention. This year in March, the American magazine Atlantic published an article with this title: The Great Fragmentation of Attention, Resisting Distraction is one of the key challenges now. So this is the key issue we're going to better investigate together this evening. And to do so, we have invited two reputed speakers. So from the other coast of the pond, from the Washington State, we have Mike Caulfield, who works at Washington University, and he directs the Center for an Informed Public Rapid Response Effort. He joined several digital literacy initiatives to fight against the lack of information, and among which the American Democracy Project of the American Association of State Colleges and Universities, the National Writing Project, and Civics Canada. He developed a method called SIFT for the fact-checking of fake news in the digital world. And now this SIFT method, SIFT method, is used in several hundreds of schools in the US and Canada. Now he's the main researcher of a project of the Science Foundation exploring the potential of these fact-checking education for adults. And as member of the Election Integrity Partnership in 2020, he talked about the information procedures in the electoral campaign in the US. And closer to us, but also on remote, we have Dr. Giuseppe Riva, chair of communication psychology at Università Cattolica del Sacro Cuore in Milan, who directs the Human Technology Lab, the Catholic University Lab, aiming at reflecting from a scientific and cultural point of view on the impact of new technologies on the different levels of human experience. He wrote several books, including Fake News, Digital Natives, Virtual Reality. And he also wrote more than 800 scientific articles on this subject. He's currently the president of the International Association of Cyber Psychology. Cyber psychology is a brand new subject of psychology, that deals with the effects of technology and of new media on man, and so the impact of that on human brain. Thanks to our guests, and so let's start straight away. So there's a real boom of data. So we're living in the big data times. So everything is talking about that. And according to some calculations made by Professor Riva, we are accumulating data at a speed that is unprecedented in history. Just to give an idea, 2.5 exabyte per day, so 2.5 quintillions of bytes, but that doesn't tell us much, actually. But this corresponds per capita per day to 100 divine comedies per day, as if every day 100 works like the divine comedies were written, for a total amount of 30 zettabytes. That is 30 followed by 31 zeros. Okay, this is absolutely unimaginable in terms of quantity of data that are generated, and that seems to be usable by so many people. So is that a reason to celebrate or not? Mike? Okay, so we can start a conversation, and let's try to be as informal as possible. Mike, okay. So, what's your take on this? I mean, what can you tell us about this?
It's yes and no, right? So we have this vast amount of information at our fingertips, and that could empower us all to be more engaged, more informed, to do good in the world. But the problem is, with so much information, the scarcity becomes attention, right? What do you pay attention to? How do you direct your attention? This is not a newly discovered problem. A person named Herbert Simon back in the 1970s noted that whenever there's an abundance of something, in this case information, it produces a scarcity. And the scarcity is what information consumes, and information consumes our attention. So we have tended to show students how to process information that's in front of them, but we haven't done as well showing students methods by which to determine what to give their deeper attention to, and this is the problem. We have a lot of information literacy. We don't have the requisite amount of attention literacy.
So, if I got you right, so clearly, from your specific vantage point that has to do with your relation with university students, it's not really a problem of access to information, but being able to filter information and devote the right level of attention to the right information. So I have a second question for you. If it's just a matter of filtering the right information, and so Giuseppe, maybe you can help us in that. If it's just a matter of filtering the right information, so with all the skills we have to develop artificial intelligence, why don't we develop an artificial intelligence-based filter helping us navigate through this wide sea of information? Would that be an easy fix? Well, that would be wonderful, but actually things are so much more complex because the legend of big data is somehow, misleading, because big data are useful today to predict things, but not to explain things. That may sound surreal, but that's how things are, because big data are very good at predicting, but not at explaining. So a 6-year child looking through the window, well, after a few months of doing the same thing every day, understands that after the dawn, you have the sunset, and the dark will come, and then light will come back again. So he understands the light cycle, but that child is not able to explain why there is darkness and why there is sunlight. Big data put us in the same position, so we're perfectly able to make to predict things using neural networks, but we cannot explain things. Neural networks learn from experience, are experience-based. So if they are not able to explain things. So if there is an unplanned event that comes up for the first time, so about which there are no previous data, well then, for those neural networks, that event won't be somehow treatable. So it is much easier, therefore, to predict behaviors for big data, and AI is very good at predicting human behaviors, for instance, because, well, the ability to predict behaviors has become a key and strategic driver, explaining also the success of Google and Facebook, because they somehow record tons of data about our behaviors every day, so they can channel then our attention. Well, but when it comes to the explanation of our daily behaviors, well, big data have no clue about that. Well, it's not accidental, the fact that one of the most intriguing sectors today is the explainable, somehow, mechanisms that can explain their own mechanisms, because neural networks make choices but do not explain the reason why. And that may become problematic in life situations that instead require an explanation. If I use AI, for instance, to decide whether to give a mortgage to a person, if I don't allow a mortgage for a person and then I have to explain why, then I may be in trouble. So the biggest challenge for neural networks and for big data as a consequence is specifically this one. So we have a very heavy prediction power, but we have no, explanation tools. That may sound as a paradox, but this is the main limit of big data. And that makes difficult to use neural networks out of today's scope, because neural networks are very good for Facebook, and are very good at making people spending longer hours on Facebook, but they cannot explain why in our cosmos there is an increase of temperatures, or they cannot explain to us how to obtain a nuclear fusion. And, well, in this respect, I have another question. All of these data that somehow cannot be properly navigated through when it comes to the cause-effect relationship, generate any consequences for us? Because we're faced with so much information. And so we are so much distracted. I teach medieval history in Nebraska, and when I started my PhD 15, 16 years ago, I remember that I was told that when teaching students, the attention span of the average student is of 45 minutes, 45, no longer. So we had somehow to manage, our teaching context considering this. But today, we are told something different. So consider that the attention span now is of about 10 minutes, 10, 15 minutes. So try to change your teaching approach, your communication approach. or, I mean, your class activity approach. So maybe a 10-minute video and then an explanation, then a group activity, and so on. This is just one among many examples I could make to tell you how much we are distracted every day, how many times, and how it is hard to keep the attention span. So is that just a problem of ours, or, I mean, what you said beforehand about big data and the way artificial intelligence is used or cannot be used to filter data is concerned. So are things related, Giuseppe? Can you please let us better understand this? Well, yes. Yes, there's a strong connection because AI systems let us better understand what can attract attention. And so big techs use those mechanisms to keep people as long as possible on their context. So the technological world has become better at captivating people's attention. On the other hand, we have a greater competition because maybe I can see what's happening on TikTok, on Instagram, but then I'm getting a new message on Twitter. So thanks to artificial intelligence, technology can understand how to captivate my attention. But on the other hand, we have several technologies using this kind of algorithm. So all that said, the real world is what pays off. I mean, because in the past, maybe I had just one distraction source, maybe the TV set, but today I have the smartphone, and then maybe I can have several apps on my smartphone trying to get my attention. So attention becomes scarce, and so it's thinned out. And young people are the champions of multitasking, but there's a price to pay because sustained attention, that is the most important one when it comes to building our own identity and our ability to give meaning to our daily life, is somehow growingly missing. Mike, so what are the consequences of this? Not just in students, but at a more general social level. What are the consequences of the fact that everything we have talked so far, so this info overload, so this huge quantity of data cannot be somehow filtered through artificial intelligence because it's not able to treat the cause-effect connection, and then all these apps and media that try to captivate constantly our attention in all possible ways. So what are the consequences of this at social level?
There are many consequences. One of the consequences I think that we're all familiar with is when people are overloaded with attention, overloaded with information, when their attention's pulled in these multiple directions, and they're seeing lots of conflicting things, but they're not spending any time on figuring out what is true and what is false and what is credible and what is not. One of the reactions that people tend to have is maybe truth is just not knowable, right? Maybe everything is somehow a little bit false, right? And so everything gets processed in this way, where we talk about something called truth compression, right? Where instead of saying, well, this is true and this is false, or this is largely true and this is largely false, we find a lot of people sort of in this middle where they're like, who can know, right? It's half true, half false. Everything is that way. And that's a direct effect of information overload, because you don't have any time. Your attention is constantly being drawn to new things, to new facts, but there's no deeper engagement with any of that. And that isn't to say that we need to give our deep attention to everything. As a matter of fact, the opposite is true, right? What's happening is we're divvying up our attention across hundreds or thousands of things, most of which we should be paying less attention to. And then we should be trying to save our attention, which is our most valuable resource, right? We should be trying to save our attention for the things that matter to us in spending a bit more time with those and getting to positions on those personally and socially where we get out of this, well, maybe everything's a little bit false mode and start to say, no, this particular thing is very credible and this particular thing is not credible at all. But you can only do that if you pay less attention to the wide array of things that are being paraded in front of you, and save your attention for the things that really matter.
And Mike, so as to what you just said about this attitude that we have, so this sort of truth compression, is that maybe a problem of being naive when it comes to considering the level of truth? So are we gullible? Beh, credo
that I call gullible cynics, which is a weird combination. But that's what you find. You find a lot of people who are very cynical and at the same time quite gullible. And it's actually their cynicism, right? Their belief that that everyone is out to get you, that everyone is out to falsely manipulate you, that makes them surprisingly gullible, right? So they can be convinced that things that are absolutely true are lies or are debatable because their cynicism is weaponized against them. You know, it's turned into a weapon against them, and so we have this phenomenon of gullible cynics, and again, the way out of that is to engage more deeply with fewer things and get on firmer ground, rather than cynicism can be a filtering mechanism. In some ways, it is the default filtering mechanism, right? So you're overwhelmed. You're looking at 100 things a day, and you have a sense that you do have a personal responsibility to decide whether these things are important or true. If you take a cynical attitude, it's kind of a lazy filter. So everything that comes across your screen, you can say, well, who can really know? You know, or it's just everything's just someone trying to sell me something, right? And that acts as a filter. That's one way to filter information, is simply to believe that all information that comes at you is somehow degraded or defiled, something along those lines. And if you do that, then you can survive this sort of information overload simply through cynicism. But we have to find different ways than that, because that cynicism kills us politically and produces a lot of this conspiracism, produces a lot of these trends that you're seeing now in society. It filters information for us by convincing us that, well, it's all a bit bogus, but the social impacts of that are quite deadly.
No, questo è assolutamente affascinante.
Oh, this is extremely fascinating what you're saying, because it is counterintuitive. So in order not to be gullible, the solution is not to become cynical. Instead, we tend to think that being cynical is the most effective filter. But you're saying the opposite, that being cynical gets you more. You become more gullible. So, I mean, which direction should we take? The direct checking? Is that the right antidote? For instance, I don't know, with respect to, I don't know, COVID numbers, COVID data, or big problems like climate change or global overheating. So if being cynical is not the right answer to fight against the lack of information, of ill information, so should we better check things? Should we do some direct checking and do more fact checking if data really truth-based and reality-based?
Honestly, I think investigating or looking at fewer things and checking them just a little more deeply helps. I think what you find when you adopt that as a practice, right, sort of reduce the amount of things you're reacting to, increase slightly the amount of things that you look into. Just, I'm not talking long investigations. I'm talking spending 3 minutes, on something rather than just, flicking it up the screen. Doing that, I think can reduce cynicism. And we've seen this when we have done interventions, research interventions with classes. We've seen when students actually go and they check things, they actually become less cynical. They trust credible things more, and they trust disreputable things less. The truth compression becomes decompressed. There's good reasons for that, for why that happens. But the biggest is that people are using this cynicism as a protective device. They feel overwhelmed by the information. They don't know how to check it. And so their easiest route is just this very lazy route. When you give them other techniques or encourage them to use other techniques to deal with the information overload, I think you can be skeptical, right? Skeptical is not bad. But you get rid of the cynicism. You get rid of the cynicism, which is a much more deep-rooted distrust of everything, and you become ultimately less gullible and less manipulated.
And I insist because it's really a crucial point. So should you just trust yourself, or should you trust also other people more? So how do you manage trust? So how can you somehow manage trust when it comes to this constant multi-channel flow of information, and especially when it comes to our sieve function?
Point there. The main thing that is driving us astray in this information economy, in attention economy, is the idea that we and our own sort of super smart brain are going to figure everything out directly without looking or trusting other sources, and that's impossible. It's impossible. It's a fantasy, right? And yet we have sort of bought into that, and the internet makes us feel sometimes like it is possible, that we are presented, we're not a medical expert, and yet someone shares a spreadsheet that supposedly proves X, Y, and Z about COVID or masks or something like that. And our belief is that, we, again, with our own abilities, are going to sort through that without having to ultimately make decisions about who to trust. And you can't, right? It's a fiction. You have to figure out who to trust, and you have to engage in that trust. What we talk about in our work is the move from a very individualistic epistemology that is focused on the idea that the individual themselves, without any reference to other people in society, can come to truth, for a social epistemology, which recognizes the best filter for information and information overload is to develop trusting relationships with reputable people, trustworthy sources. Sometimes, people that may share your values, but also people who are careful with the truth. And when you find those sorts of things, to not feel ashamed that you're relying on other people to process this. This is the way things have, in fact, been. And it's just even more necessary in this world where so many issues are beyond our individual comprehension. And yet the internet fools us into thinking that somehow we can go through them ourselves without ever needing to trust individuals. And so that's what we need to get to, is we need to get to a social epistemology, which is a little less worshiping of the individual self and the individual cognition, and a little more accepting of the fact that the solution to this is that we work together, and that we realize our own limitations.
Giuseppe,
So at social level, all that seems extremely interesting, but at personal level, I mean, what's the connection with attention? Why is attention so important? So attention is important, especially sustained attention, the one we were robbed of by technology, because this is the mechanism letting us build our own identity. Psychologists talk about autobiographical memory, referring to the memory having to do with our daily life. We have the short-term memory that lasts a few seconds or maybe some minutes. And then we have the long-term memory, allowing us to fix some life events in order to create some meaning over time. Technology makes it more and more difficult to set up an episodic memory that then turns into the autobiographical memory. I make an example. So I'm at a party for my daughter's school end of year, and I don't know, maybe my phone rings and I'm distracted because I take the call. So maybe I was there physically in presence, but then maybe I risk actually to miss in my memory that party, that moment, because then I won't fix that event in my long-term memory, as if it never happened somehow. And sustained attention is also jeopardized by, online activities, because, well, I'm here at my place, so I'm with you without being with you. So this radically changes the kind of relation we have, because if I were to be with you in the same room, you could also see my body language, I would see your body language, and I could then connect my sustained attention to the place where you are. Over the last 5-6 years, neurosciences have found out that actually in our brain, in order to help people build their own memory, we have the GPS neurons that are activated when we are in one place. At the end of the 70s, they were considered as very useful to, get orientation in physical places. But actually, these neurons play a key role when it comes to organizing our memory. So we somehow fix places, and those places define our identity. I'm a university professor because I go to university every day. I'm a student because I go to school every day. And COVID robbed of places. We were deprived of places because of COVID. And so that's why long-term sustained memory was jeopardized. And that brought about a sort of sense of distress, of discomfort, because we were able to be online all day long, but then we felt empty and void at the end of the day, at the end of each week, because we lost also physical places because of the pandemic. And that was, very heavy in terms of consequences. This is so interesting because I think that we all experienced that, the kind of estrangement sensation we all went through, especially during the most critical phases of the pandemic, but still today, because we still have many Zoom calls and many remote events we join. So on the one hand, this is an advantage because we can have this conversation, but at the same time, I know that it's not really the same if you were here in presence. That would be different because I can see people in front of me and you can't, for instance. So the importance of places. So because of sort of that place-related memory anchoring mechanism, we build our own identity, but also smell. Smell is a way to better fix places and then memories and recollections. Is that correct? Oh, yes, definitely. Developmental mechanisms made some mechanisms helping us better fix our most meaningful life events. So there are some sensory-related mechanisms that help us build our own identity. For instance, smell, but also body movements and body motion are key. And again, the online world deprived us of all that. Sometimes when we cannot explain the attention triggering mechanisms, we do not know how to avoid that. Because, for instance, when it comes to the economy attention, well, some larger companies do not know very well which are the effects of the manipulation of attention. But then, actually, we see that the deepest sort of level of ourselves is affected. Our deepest humanity, our own identity, our own sense of belonging to a group. So going back to places, and for instance, joining the meeting not just online, but in person, marks a difference. And so going back to physical places, to in-person events, it's a great way to gain back the attention technologies took from us. So places, attention, and identity building are strictly connected. Going back to this year's meeting title, A Passion for the Person, so you are saying that a sustained attention that is somehow fixed and related to a specific physical place is key, not just to somehow live something in the moment, but also to build our own identity as individuals. Is that correct? Yes, definitely. We realized that any form of a primary gathering facilitates identity building, because I'm never alone when it comes to a gathering. I'm never alone in a place, or almost never. A place somehow forces people to be together, and we are all very busy. Some months ago, I took my daughter to a pizza place for a little party, and I was struck by the fact that my daughter's girlfriends were constantly fiddling with their smartphones. So even if you are with somebody in a place, you are still distracted by your own smartphone. So, okay, I'm in a pizza place with my girlfriend, I start a conversation, and if I can talk without being distracted by the smartphone, well, I'm very lucky. But maybe if I'm bored by the person in front of me, I will get my smartphone and do something else. So technology somehow reduce the level of shared attention in places, because the attention towards the other is the key mechanism to build up, social behaviors. And neurosciences support and corroborate what Mike said, because if we cannot develop shared attention with another person, well, if we can, share attention with another person, something stems from that. There is the hyper scanning technology that we have at the Catholic University that let us analyze at the same time the brain activity of several people at the same time. And when I can somehow focus my attention on somebody else and vice versa, our brains get synchronized so that we can reduce personal distances beyond empathy that stems from mirror neurons that let us immediately seize what the other is doing. There is a sort of brain synchronicity mechanism that let us create a sense of us, because being social can be different. There is us and there is them. In order to create us, in order to develop the trust, we need to find out who are the people who are us and not the people who are them. But in order to discover this us, we need to share attention with other people. And this is key, not just for adults, but also for kids. If there is no shared attention between the mother and the child, there is no motherhood. Let's think about Alessia, the mother that abandoned her daughter for 1 week. And I tried to find a photo of this woman with her daughter, and there is none. So this little girl was 18 months old, but there's no picture of the mother with the daughter. I have 2 kids, and I know far too well that is hard, to have shared attention with one's own children. But you need to somehow spend shared attention with your children, but also with other people, because this is a key gesture to develop the trust that was mentioned beforehand. So I try to somehow recap and sum up some of these interesting ideas that you are mentioning. So attention is key. So again, we started from trying to understand who to trust. So cynicism is not the answer. Being cynical, you become gullible. But instead, you should try to make a selection. So to understand who is a reliable source. And then, Giuseppe, you went on saying that attention is key for identity building, in order to let people build their own identity. And this is also crucial in order for an individual to develop meaningful relationships with other people, so that, we won't end up all by ourselves fiddling with our smartphones in restaurants. And again, going back to democracy, this is even more important. So because identity building is important for any society, any democracy, also not just for our own autobiography, but also in order to be able to become relational beings. Okay, well, these 40 first minutes were quite fruitful and productive. And now we know that this is not just a problem for teachers. I mean, this problem is not just about teachers or people who have problems in reading a Dostoevsky novel or watching a Tarkovsky movie. This attention span problem is a widespread problem and is strictly related to this passion for the person, because we need to spend shared attention with another person in order to somehow develop trust, in order to somehow avoid being cynical. So I would like to end with a question for both of you. How then can we go back to attention? How can we do something? Because, okay, we are overflooded by sources of distraction. Everybody wants to catch our attention. And somehow, sometimes behind that, there are properly designed mechanisms designed to distract us. Hannah Arendt, in The Origin of Totalitarianism, wrote that in order for a propaganda to be successful, the crucial key is to distract people, to distract citizens. And we can see the effect of this kind of approach under our eyes. So, Mike, you said that there is a problem of scarcity of attention. So somehow, maybe we should give less attention to some things. So could you elaborate a bit more on this? What do you really mean by that?
Sometimes people think the problem, sometimes people say, well, people aren't paying attention to various things, or they're not engaged in deep attention. And the idea that people promote is, well, we just all need to pay more attention. And that's not quite right, because attention is a zero-sum game, right? You can't pay more attention to something without giving something less. And so the first question is, what are you going to give less attention to? And that has to be where you start. And part of what that involves at a social level, at a technological level, and at a personal level is quick filtering to decide that things are not worth your attention and being okay with that, right? So one of the things that we find with the way the internet works, with the way the web sends things to us, is they demand our attention, they demand our engagement, and if something comes up that seems particularly disturbing, we feel that we must somehow react or engage with it. And we don't necessarily need to do that, right? We can wait. One of the very simple things I tell people when they look at what's one of the easiest things that you can do to increase your information literacy and your attention literacy ultimately. And one of the easiest things is look at something, a breaking story that you don't know if it's true or false, and ask yourself, do I need to know this now? Can I wait until there's better information? And that's the idea, right? Is that, for example, in that particular case, if you wait, you'll be able to apply your attention to better information that will be available in a few hours or a few days. But if you're always compulsively thinking, I have to do this now, I have to look at this now, then you're going to be dividing your attention across all these small things, and you're not going to be getting the best information. You're always going to be getting in this example, that early information that is really just people speculating. And so this is the first task for us, is we have to not think about how we train ourselves to give more attention. I think the first thing is we have to figure out what to give less attention to, and then have to sort of train ourselves to give less attention to those things so that we have the attention to give to these other pieces. That has to be not just a personal thing. That has to be at the level of the platforms as well. That has to be in the technology. I think we can do our part to get better at saying, is this worth my attention? And have that be the first question. I tell people come into my courses and say, oh, we're going to figure out if things are true or false. And I tell them, that's not the first question. The first question is this worth your time, right? Is this worth your attention? After that, you can figure out true or false. But your first question is this worth my attention? And is this worth my attention now? We can train people to do that. People can learn to do that. But they need help from the technology platforms as well. We need to, it's very difficult for us to get out of this solely through our personal actions. It's a social problem. It requires full, full end-to-end social solutions.
Giuseppe, stessa domanda.
Same question for you, Giuseppe. Following on what Mike has just suggested, that is more targeted attention to what is worth our interest and being more critical in to where to drive our site. How can we start doing this, starting with attention? Well, the interesting point is that evolution has equipped subjects with tools to make them understand whether what they're doing is relevant or not. And this is not emotion, as many may think. It's not that I have to focus only on what I like and exclude what I don't like. In fact, the research activity of an American colleague, Professor Csikszentmihalyi, that unfortunately left us some months ago, has demonstrated that there is a state of optimal experience that is called flow, in which the subject can make the most of it, and it's not so difficult to realize whether one is in the flow or not. But what his research found is that this state of flow, of optimal experience, is regardless of culture. It's present everywhere and also goes beyond what we do. It's not about specific things. It is about what I do and seeing that what I do can really absorb me. What happens when we experience this flow is that we lose the sense of time. We don't feel that time is passing by, and we manage to do things in an intuitive way. One of the most typical characteristics of the sense of flow is that I have an objective to achieve, and I can achieve that without asking my brain to intervene in a practical way. It is the tennis player that is able to strike the right strike, and it is other subjects doing the right thing at the right time. There's many things that I learned to do that in the past were not intuitive. The example I always give to my students is that about writing. Now we are able to write in an intuitive way, but my daughter had to write A, B, and C in elementary school and repeat this rote writing. And what happens when we are able to use a tool intuitively is that the tool allows us to do something that we couldn't do before. And we realized that before because all of a sudden we are able to become aware of the flow of things without any problem. So on one side, we have to seek this flow. If we find things that produce this flow that don't produce stress to us, it means that eventually at the end of the day, we did something that we really want to do. And the other point is awareness, or what is known today as mindfulness. That is the awareness of the things that we do. What happens today, and Mike has explained this very well, is that technology is able to make us do things that we don't want to do, and to take our attention when we don't want to give attention to that thing. So a fundamental point that we can consider as individuals is that to understand to what we give our attention. Today, our smartphones have tools that can count the time of use of the smartphones and how we use time using the smartphones. If you are aware that we use 5 hours of our time using social networks, well, this is something that make me ask myself, did I really want to spend 5 hours on social networks? So this focus on the flow and awareness increase are two tools that can be very helpful to be able to regain attention that we were deprived of. Well, this is really interesting indeed, because this idea of the flow, this state of flow of a total immersion, absorption, I understand that it is not just about greater productivity. We all understand that if we are not distracted continuously by the smartphone or other things, we can work better. But considering what you're saying, this kind of absorption can lead us to a deeper meaning, a deeper sense. Newport is another author you made me think of now. This author studied what he calls deep work instead of flow, but it is basically a similar experience. And as soon as Carl is at the end of his PhD, he studied to become professor of IT sciences. And he is about to complete his PhD, and he's about to enter the job market. And he realizes that there is a very little post as professor in the US for that. So for 1 year, he decides to travel and do observation for 3-4 days of dozens of people involved in the most diverse professions, Wall Street brokers to organic farming. So people that for many different reasons and for what they said, they were happy with their job. He left, he went to observe them for 3-4 days. He observed those individuals to try and grasp the secret they had of being happy while working, because he thought, maybe I don't manage to do what I want to do, that is being a university professor, so I rather find out how to do a job that can make me happy. And there is a book where he explains all these experiences, and at the beginning of the book, which made him famous, this deep work, this deep state of absorption, he narrates a situation that really struck him. At some point, he was looking at a worker in Wisconsin, in the US. He was forging Viking swords. This was a blacksmith. There is an interesting documentary on YouTube that you can find about this if you're interested. So he observes this blacksmith and how this blacksmith can work from metal ingot and get to the end of the process to get a real sword. And it's 8-hour work of absolute concentration, requiring particular strength and deep attention, because just one minor wrong hit, or if you take the blade from the oil in a wrong way, the sword would break into pieces. So he's really struck when observing this worker, this blacksmith, as he is really into what he is doing totally. And he really sees that this person is really enjoying his job, and he really made sense of his work. It's not just hitting a rock in a boring way. I think this is really something that has emerged from what you said. It's not just about attention as a new kind of muscle, not just mindfulness, because now it's the new buzzword, and so we all try to do some oriental meditation, and we can all feel at ease in this world. This is something that goes beyond this. And in my view, this evening, in this very intense dialogue, we've had so many open questions that it would be great to continue to discuss during future conversation. So I would like to close this session with an invitation, mentioning the words of an American poet who is one of the most known and popular poets in the US, Mary Oliver, in a booklet she wrote at the end of her life, she has a very short poem entitled Instructions for Living a Life. Pay attention, get marveled, and narrated. With this, I would like to close our session and also remind you all that the meeting is a place of culture that makes it possible to have sessions like this. And this can be the beginning of renewing our attention in the sense that we mentioned tonight. All of you can contribute to make this history a great history. By donating, supporting the event, you will find the Dona Ora desks in all the halls. And the novelty this year is that the Meeting Foundation has been registered as a third sector association. So you can also take advantage of fiscal advantages by donating. I want to thank our guests, and a big applause is being made for you. Thanks to our guests that could connect to the session by means of technology from very distant places with different time zones. Thank you, Mike, for being up so early this Saturday. And thank you all for attending the session, for listening to this conversation in this room. And thanks to all those who connected, who joined us online, and who will continue to join us in the next day. So pay attention, get marveled, pay attention, be astonished, and tell about it. Thank you.
Yeah, sure. Hold on a second. I'm having a little trouble hearing over that down there. If
La civiltà dell'amore, fratelli e sorelle, costruite senza stancarvi mai questa civiltà. Lavorate per questo, pregate per questo, soffrite per questo.
Sì. No, io sono svizzera, cioè sono americana, ma sui tempi siamo abituati a non sgarrare di mezzo secondo. Ciao! Come stai? Mi ricordo.